No, you like these shoes though?
Yeah, I think they're cute.
Yeah, I like them. I like them too because you don't have to wear socks with them.
Yeah.
They have the cork bottoms, kind of like Birkenstocks. Yeah. But anyways, welcome to Hip and Humble. I'm Aram.
And I'm Mom.
And we talk about all things antique and collectibles. And we are supported by Hip and Humble Antiques, LLC. We've got 2 locations, one just outside of Oklahoma City in Bethany, Oklahoma at the Rink Gallery, and another one in downtown Fredericksburg, Virginia at Oldies But Goodies. Also, we have an Etsy store, an online store for those of you that are not in the area, and that's Hip and Humble Antiques on Etsy. We are also supported by the WGSN DB Going Solo Network. It's a national online radio network, and it is a lot of fun, and you guys should definitely check out everything they got.
Yeah, they've got a lot of fun stuff.
Yeah, they really do. Mm-hmm. Well, folks, it is another beautiful day. I swear I'm reading exactly what I wrote for last week.
He is.
No.
He really is. But it was a pretty day.
It was a pretty day.
It was a little warm.
Yeah.
And it's supposed to get really warm this weekend.
Mm-hmm.
So, which, warm equals humidity here. So we'll see how that goes.
Well, I don't mind the humidity, but that's because I sweat all the time as it is.
Well, I do.
But anyways,
of course, now I have we're in the basement, and the basement stays a lovely 68 degrees pretty much all the time.
Yeah, pretty much year round.
So that's why I have on my sweater, because it's cold.
But guys, it's really great to see you all again. And those of you that checked out last week's episode on YouTube, thank you very much for the support. And if you want to, please subscribe to our channel, as we will continue to post new episodes each week. Those of you who don't want to see my ugly mug, I completely understand.
No, I don't have any ugly children.
Uh-huh.
I don't.
And I am still grateful that you choose to spend a little time with us each week, listening to our take on some of the things in history that we find most interesting. Now, last week we began speaking about the topic of ironing. Thrilling, I know, but hear us out. Yes,
ironing as a chore may not always be all that exciting to everyone, especially me sometimes. But through innovation, humans have been able to develop interesting methods to take care of their clothes.
Yeah.
So we began last week about talking about how separate cultures began to develop their own primitive tools for getting all the wrinkles out.
Mm-hmm.
We also spoke about the time period where these innovations took place.
Yep.
The interesting part about innovation is not something generally correlated to the Middle Ages. But technology, among others, finds its origins there.
Yeah. Specifically, so the iron is definitely not the only technology or the innovation to come out of the Middle Ages. But we left off last week talking about the pathway from smoothers and rollers towards the iron. We also talked about how one of the key differences in primitive technology from the East to the West was their use of the elements.
In the East, they began with the application of heat. And the West began with the application of moisture. We know today that the combination of those two is what allows for the crispest clothes.
That's right.
Now, I remember when I was young, my mother, would teach us, of course, taught us how to iron. And one of the things that my grandmother taught her, and I do sometimes occasionally still use, because starch was not a thing. Cause now we kind of rely on starch to kind of get everything really nice and smooth and whatever. Mm-hmm. So what we do is you would take water and kind of sprinkle it on whatever you're ironing. And then we would get a bag and put it in the bag and then put it in the refrigerator for about half an hour till all that kind of nice moisture kind of worked its way through the clothes and everything was a little bit damp. And then you would iron it. So, and it would come out pretty much just like, if you had used starch. So,
interesting.
Yeah.
Well, I guess that makes sense, because whenever you apply the heat, that is a shock to it. And if it's even colder than it normally would have been with just the...
Well, I think the cold just kind of helps the moisture get through it.
Yeah, that makes sense.
So everything it's not wet, but it's not, there's just like the little sweet period, thing there where it's not soaking wet, but it's not totally dry.
Right.
So everything is just damp.
Just damp. Yeah. Well, that's England for you.
Yeah. Well, that's true. Yeah. And I will say that a couple times I did leave stuff in there and it did mold. So don't do that.
Yeah. Well, I feel like, anytime you add steps to chores that I normally already do, That's usually not good.
Yeah, it didn't work out well. But I will say sometimes when if I don't have starch or whatever, I will do that. I'll damp it, stick it in the fridge for about half an hour and bring it out. So a lot of irons now, you just put water in it and you can spray it, but.
Yeah, that's what I do. I saw my iron has a little sprayer and I'll just spray the actual fabric with the iron and then go over it.
Yeah, I have that. I have those irons.
Yeah.
But I also have irons that I picked up all over the place and they're brand new from the 1950s and 60s
those are great.
They're heavy. They're heavy irons. And they get hot.
Oh yeah.
I mean hot.
Yeah.
And they don't have an automatic shut off, which if you sew, automatic shut off is a pain in the neck because every time you sew something, anytime you sew a seam, you gotta go and iron it.
Right.
And so if I gotta sew, if I'm sewing 2 or 3 things and now I gotta wait 10 minutes till the stupid iron heats up. So,
Yeah. So it absolutely is it's definitely a detriment. It's very tedious.
I mean, for other people that leave their iron on, it's a great safety thing, but.
Well, absolutely. And I know.
I have all my electronics, everything on a strip. So I just, I turn everything off and then I hit that strip. So
and I know there was a big push in the late 90s into the 2000s. I would say maybe even earlier whenever the government started regulating a lot of the small home appliances that had short fuses like that, because a lot of people were, committing suicide by dropping these appliances into the bathtubs with them, or a lot of people were dying accidental deaths because of it as well. And so I know that
I don't know anybody that would be ironing next to a bathtub.
I do.
Well, I don't. Okay,
I feel like you would definitely.
With whatever iron you have, just don't iron in your bathroom. Do it somewhere else.
Well, you can iron in your bathroom, just maybe don't have the bath full of water.
Just don't. Just, get your TV, go in the living room, set your stuff up, watch a couple shows, get it done, and move on.
But that all kind of brings us back, though, that whenever you're ironing, getting the best iron or getting the smoothest clothes always comes from that combination of moisture and heat. And before Europeans discovered this revolutionary combination, they continued developing differing flat-sided tools to stay fresh. An interesting thing about people and our relationship to material is the culture surrounding it. In Scandinavia, the Dutch called their smoothing tool a mangle board and a roller. And some of these mangle boards have remained very well preserved and were actually passed down as heirlooms.
Well, this is because in their culture, mangle boards were developed by the Dutch people.
Right.
But they would carve them into very elaborate and artistic designs.
Yeah.
Beauty often goes hand in hand with love, which the custom, and through that, customs are born.
That's very true.
So traditionally, a young Dutch man would put together a mangle board and carve it into something beautiful for his bride-to-be.
How sweet, huh?
Yeah. Here, honey, have an iron.
Yeah. Here, you want this? This is going to be great for all your chores.
Whatever. But yeah. But it is sweet that they would take the time to carve it.
Yeah. Well, and generally I would assume that the carved mangle boards were not not really meant for use. More of a decorative piece.
I would hope so.
I would hope, yes.
I would definitely hope so. I just, for all the men out there, don't give your bride to be an iron.
Yeah, that's a really bad call.
I don't care how pretty the iron is. I don't care what you've done to the iron. Just don't. It goes for vacuum cleaners and power tools, unless they're specifically asked for.
Right.
But generally.
Right. Well, if they were a seamstress and they needed an iron that didn't have an automatic shutoff and that's what they asked for, sure.
Well,
but in general,
don't do that. Just let's go to the jewelry store. Let's go for some flower.
Pearls. Catherine loves pearls.
Well, yeah, I got a whole story about pearls. Whole story about Catherine can have pearls. I've got pearls.
Well, I'll tell her that. Tell her to ask you for all those.
Yeah, well, if I don't get any grandkids soon, I don't know. I may withhold my husband was deployed. My husband was deployed and, he called and I just had Aram and Kale, had my two older sons at the time. My youngest hadn't been born yet. And they were sick. I mean, sick. So he called and he's like,
I remember
what are you doing?
Story.
He's like, hey, what are you doing? I'm like, I'm cleaning up barf and all kinds of nastiness. And he's like, oh, wow, that didn't sound very fun. I said, no, sweet pea, it's not. I said, what are you doing? He goes, oh, well, we're going out snorkeling. And I'm like, huh, click. So he called back and he goes, you know how hard it is to get an overseas line? I said, you know how hard it is to get barf out of the carpet? And hung up on him. And he called back again and he goes, okay, I'm really sorry about that. I said, yeah. I said, you know what? When you get off that plane, you better have some pearls in your hands from all your snorkeling efforts. And he did. I mean, he was very sweet. He did.
Well, so for some context here, back at that time, he didn't get a phone call but once every month.
Well, then we did. I mean, whenever he first started deploying out, you got, basically 5 minutes once a week. So, I mean, in 5 minutes, it was, you just verbal diarrhea for all the stuff that you needed to say and you know, all the, marital stuff you got to say. Okay, hey, did you pay this? Did you pay this? You know, you got this, got that. Okay.
Right.
Kids aren't dead. Woohoo.
Right.
You know, life is good. And that was it. But then eventually, you know, he was higher in rank and all that. So a lot of times he had his own office and his own desk, and so then he could call a little bit more frequently. Right.
But at that time, that was one of his very limited phone calls. And so he, you know, of course he has no context. He has no context for the fact that any of us are doing.
I think after I said they're sick.
Yeah.
That's a context right there.
Well, absolutely.
If I, which I'm not going to do for y'all because y'all know what sick is, but after I have verbally explained to him what kind of sick you are, there's context there. So telling your wife that you're now going out for a day of snorkeling, and fishing and whatever, probably just keep some of that to yourself.
I mean, that's fair. That's fair. I will say, just in his defense, he was just trying to share what he was experiencing with you in the short time that he had to share it. And it wasn't the right time. You're absolutely right. But
okay, this is proof why men don't. You know, he is male, and they don't click. It just
I get it. It's not like I would do it. I'm just trying to say.
I don't know. I married a blonde man, and I got 3 blonde sons, so I'm just pretty much made that bed for myself.
Yes, you did. And we have had many traditions come about because of these things, and Dad coming back and forth from different deployments. And speaking of traditions and getting away from this topic, the customs and traditions of the Dutch that we were talking about earlier, they're a very peculiar thing. And traditions in general are peculiar. Most have legends of origin, but those legends are often varied by region or by culture. And some of these customs or traditions don't even really have an origin story. They just are. You know, we do these things. Why we do these things is a very interesting question. And I think it's one that gets brought up every generation.
Yeah, probably so. But every generation really does seem to fight to preserve their ideas. But I will say, as I do get older, I really don't see it as a fight to preserve ideas, but as a fight to preserve Christ in our daily lives.
Yeah.
So, but even those who don't believe in God and Christ, they always talk about an easier time, you know, when you could still trust people and, you know, take people at face value and your actual word meant something. But I do believe that, the farther we get away from Christ, the worse humanity becomes.
Well, absolutely. And I think a lot of it too, you know, whenever an older generation is speaking about being face to face and having that trust face to face, a lot of it comes from the type and the frequency of communication, because now we don't have a lot of people, especially in my generation and younger generations, they don't understand how to have a lot of face-to-face communication.
No, they really don't.
You know, and I believe each generation has a different perspective because of how they communicate.
That is very true, because a lot of times, you know, I will talk to somebody younger your age, and they're looking at me like they don't look at you. They don't know how to look you in the eye and have a conversation. They're looking everywhere but you. They're all nervous. They're all shifty, and it's kind of like, okay, I'm not trusting you because you can't even look me in the face and say something something very basic.
Well, and I think a lot of that is
they don't know how.
because those customs or those niceties, for lack of a better term, of communication are being lost through because of the expansive levels or types of communication that we have. I mean, the majority of people in, like, say, Tavin's generation, they talk through applications. They don't ever see each other's faces except for in pictures or if they're going places together. And whenever they're out there, their actual verbal talk is very primitive, and it's not, it's very elementary. Yeah. And I do agree. Earlier you talked about the people getting further away from Christ. And I think that for my generation and younger generations, the divisions in the church that happened whenever a lot of these denominations were created and the sects of church and the different church doctrines were split, and people, there was discrimination within the church. I think that a lot of these things specifically influenced my generation to view the church negatively.
Well, because I think a lot of people in my generation, that was so hurtful that it really kind of went. And, I've got one friend and just absolutely hates the church, and she looks at everybody in the church. If you're a Christian at all, then you're a hypocrite. And of course, the irony of that is that she's hypocritical of everybody else.
Right.
So, I mean, you're going to be part of a religion at some point, whether it is your political ideology or you've made something up or you're following whatever. All of that to me is religion, but it's not.
Well,
traditional religion.
It's an ideology.
It's an ideology.
All of it is an ideology. It's either you are following an ideology of having a creator, of believing in a savior, or you're following the ideology of you believe in people. You believe that if somehow we got the right people in power, that they could save everybody and everyone would be equal and everything would be just. And that's just as farcical. That idea takes just as much faith as any other idea.
Sure, it does. But, for me anyway, I mean, God has never failed me. Mm-hmm. He's always been perfect. Every person I've ever known that is human has always failed somehow, including myself.
Absolutely.
I got a long line.
Everybody definitely,
has.
Yeah, absolutely. Everyone has failed themselves. Everyone's failed everyone around them many times in their life. And I think, and for me, why I choose to have that relationship with Christ is because of what it has done for me. I had a friend recently actually talk to me, and a lot of times I felt like, maybe I don't know that I'm the greatest example, or feeling like I just don't know if I'm living right, or what people see whenever they see me. And I had a friend of mine recently say, I'm really jealous of you and your wife's marriage, because you guys have that foundation on God, and that seems like it's such a strong base for you to move forward and resolve conflicts. And I was like, yeah, that's why that is. And it just really affirmed that, whenever you are living in His will, then people notice.
Well, when you guys were little, we went to a church in Bellevue, Nebraska, and we had the little small group kind of thing. Mm-hmm. And all these couples were going around kind of telling about their marriage, and, some of them had cheated on their spouse and now they're back together, and, how they've gotten through all these little tragedies and stuff. And I was kind of like, we haven't really gone through any of that kind of stuff at all. I said, I really just don't see anything, there's just no big tragedy or story here. And the guy that was the leader of the group at the time, he said, but your marriage is an example. It's not perfect, which nobody's is.
No.
But it's not perfect. He said, but you're married, your parents were married, your grandparents were married, your great grandparents were married. So you give us hope that this does work, that when you have God in those relationships, that it does go on.
And a lot of it too is just that open communication and that dialogue, and also the agreed understanding of that basis of belief. So before Catherine and I got married, whenever we did pre-marriage counseling, and during that pre-marriage counseling, we kind of hashed out a lot of the what we could. I mean, nobody knows. Nobody knows what you're getting into. Nobody knows what they're getting into. No one does. But one of the things I had said to her was, listen, whenever we talk and whenever we have issues, it's never me against you or you against me. It's always me and you against that issue. And if and to that end, we've stuck to that. I guess mantra is maybe that's what you would call it. I mean,
every day with the marriage and stuff. And as you grow in your marriage, the length of time in your marriage, it's not that you think exactly, you're never going to think exactly alike. I mean,
and thank goodness you don't.
Well, yeah.
That's a whole nother thing.
That's a whole nother thing. But as you have longer marriages and, it'll be 30 years that Daddy and I have been married this month. There's just a lot of those little things that you're just now kind of going through and stuff. We don't even see it anymore.
Yeah.
You just don't even.
Yeah.
Because you just kind of accept some things about your spouse. And that's it. That's, and it's kind of like, okay, it's your choice to get up every morning. Is all this little stuff going to be bugging the crap out of me today? Or let's move on.
Well, and that's the other thing.
Accept and go on.
And that mention of a choice is, I think, perfect because every day is a choice to actively love that other person.
Oh yeah. And some days that's hard.
Yeah. Some days it's super hard. Some days it's super easy, but every single day it's an active choice. It's like, when I wake up in the morning, I say, I'm going to be a husband. I'm going to love my wife. And I think that's what propels me to make the decisions I do to try to involve her and try to communicate as clear as I possibly can with her. Now, obviously I sometimes over communicate, but,
that's something that I think particularly you and any of you guys out there that have a spouse that talks too much. But you have to edit, but you do have to go through and edit.
Yeah.
After a while. I mean, it's just like if you're talking to a 5-year-old, because you teach a 5-year-old class.
I do.
You're talking to a 5-year-old and you are giving them this whole long monologue about whatever.
Yeah, no, I can see. I do that. I catch myself with that a lot, and I literally see their eyes just glaze over,
and they're like, okay. When did we get to eat after this? What's going on?
Yeah, after about the first,
same with adults.
After about the first 20 seconds of me speaking, it's just you can just see like their eyes are focused, but there's nothing.
There's nothing there. No. And that's the thing, but that's something that you've always struggled with, but that's something that I think as you get older, you are starting to edit and you're like, okay, what is the most important thing that I need to convey right now?
Yeah.
And not give 5 million reasons of why you need to convey it. Just say it.
Yes. Yeah. I've definitely been doing that a lot, especially in my writing and stuff too, especially my professional writing for my work. I'm like, okay, what is the smallest amount of words I can use to get this point across clearly?
Bullet points.
And on that note, we need to take a break. Okay.
Hi, my name is Kaylin, and I'm the host of a new podcast called Tea Time Thoughts. Do you ever wish you could learn more about history, books, music, art, and culture, but you just don't know where to start? I totally feel your pain. Learning about all these things can be so overwhelming. Well, I want to change all of that for you. In my podcast, Tea Time Thoughts, I'll show you just how fun it all can be. In the time it takes to have a cup of tea, I'm going to teach you everything from the French Revolution to the Black Plague, Mozart to Broadway musicals, Da Vinci to Robert Frost, ancient Egypt to Queen Elizabeth II, and more. You can stream Tea Time Thoughts wherever you listen to your favorite podcasts. So what are you waiting for? Put the kettle on and listen to Tea Time Thoughts today.
Welcome back to Hip and Humble. I'm still Aram.
And I'm still Mom.
And we are still talking about irons, kinda.
We are.
And we are supported by
ironing out the world's problems.
One wrinkle at a time. But we are supported by Hip and Humble Antiques, LLC. If you're not following us on Instagram, please do. It makes me feel better. I really like it. And not that you should really care about how I feel. But.
Well, But respond to us on Instagram and say, hey, you guys kind of look up the history of whatever.
A, B, C, or D, and we
love to do that.
We do love to do that, and it's hipin.humble. That's HIPN.humble. Also, if you really like what we're doing and you want us to continue and maybe support us a little bit, consider checking out our Patreon page. That's patreon.com/hipandhumble, and go ahead and leave us a tip, or if you want to subscribe, and we'll start putting some really cool stuff on there. Maybe some deleted scenes or like clips.
Deleted scenes.
Yeah. Well, now that we have video, there's so many options. But anyways, we are also supported by the WGSN DB Going Solo Network. It's a national online radio network with tons of really great creators and content. Please check them out.
Absolutely.
So we kind of left off talking about the communication in marriage, and
which really doesn't have a whole lot to do with irons.
It kind of does.
Ironing out the problems in the marriage.
Yeah, but guys, I will say, being married for only 2 years, my advice doesn't really carry a lot of weight, but
you know what? It's just like with raising kids. Don't sweat the small stuff.
No. And just be clear about what you want. And before you move into things, make sure that you're in agreement. I mean, obviously small things and little decisions you have to make on your own because everyone is an individual, but.
Well, and I mean, even just small things, because I know there's a lot of people that sit there and fight over, the toilet paper roll and.
Oh, yeah.
I
that kind of stuff doesn't even cross my mind.
No, well, it does if you're a girl with those seats up all the time, but honest to goodness, I have 3 sons and a husband. I gave up that fight a long time ago. Every time I go in the bathroom, I flip it to make sure and go on about my business. Yeah. And that's just, that's just what you do. So, and even, someone had told me once, cause when you're first married, you want things you're used to doing things a certain way.
Yeah.
And you just gotta give it up.
Yeah. Well, I remember one of the best things that Dad had ever told me, or Dad told me before he got married. He says, or no, it was you actually. You told me, you said, whenever you get married to someone, you start living with them, you start to notice that they're they're not your family. Like they don't do things like your family does, and it can be grating. But I will say for me, because I got married a little older, I'd lived with other people for a while. That shock wasn't as big.
No, but I think when you're first married, they do things very differently.
They do things differently.
But I think that's kind of part of you becoming your own couple.
Yes.
Because she's bringing stuff in and you're bringing stuff in, and
you complement each other.
And it may not be the same way to do something. It's like whenever I would leave Dad with you guys when you're little, and I expected everything to be done the way I do things.
Oh yeah, no.
And I came back and nothing is done. I'm like, oh my gosh, what the heck is this?
Mm-hmm.
But in the end, I'm like, you know what? They're relatively clean. Mm-hmm. They were fed, and now they're asleep.
Yeah.
Let's just call it a win and move on.
Well, and I will say too, so for me, I clean things a lot like you, obviously, and Catherine cleans things like Catherine. And I've learned that
Catherine, he's going to get in trouble.
I'm going to get in trouble. I know.
Yeah.
And this is not a detriment, and she does get things clean. Let me clarify before I get in lots and lots of trouble.
You're a little anal, Aaron.
Yeah, I'm a little bit anal. But I have noticed whenever Catherine is cleaning and she requests assistance, to not do it my way at all.
See, you're learning.
Never do it my way. I've learned just if she's in cleaning mode, cause she's one of those, she'll get in those like moods where she's like, okay, sure, this has to be clean today. And I'm like, all right. And then like, all right, what can I do to help? Because I've learned if I just start helping and doing the things that I think need to be done to help clean that room, that is wrong.
Well, and like for me, it's been the opposite, because I will sit there and Dad will be helping me do something, and I'm like, okay, here's what I need you to do. And I give it to him in bullet point steps of what A, B, C, and D. He's like, then he starts to question, and I'm like, nope. I was like, you know what? All those questions that you have, I've already tried. This is the way it's done. Either help or get out of the way.
Yeah.
And it's like, oh, okay. Oh, and then he's like, oh, I see why we do it this way. I see. Okay.
Mm-hmm. Well, and I've learned too.
Don't reinvent the wheel. You got your stuff. I got mine. If we're helping each other, just do what we say and move on.
Well, and that's the key thing. Like she's got, we both have things that we're good at. At one point I was changing the oil on one of the cars, and I'm under the car pulling the bolts out, putting the pan down, I'm busy.
Changing the oil.
And she comes out there and says, well, why are you doing that? Well, why don't you do it this way? I was like, I know how to do this. I'm going to need you to step back and let me do it. It's going to take me longer to explain it than it is for me to do it.
There you go.
And after that, we both kind of had that understanding, like, okay, there's the things you do and there's the things I do. If you need help or I need help, I will give you exact instructions. Otherwise, do not take the liberties for yourself.
And that's very true. I mean, I know women livers or whatever, like, we can do everything. Yeah, we can do everything,
Absolutely.
but I don't want to.
Well, not only, it's not even,
and I'm not as good.
It's not even that.
I'm never going to be as strong as my husband. No. Never. Or my sons. Never going to be as strong as my husband. But I am smarter than they are because I still find the ways to do things, whatever it is.
Right.
And then, of course, then they come in and they go, huh. Okay, Mom.
Yeah. Well, and kind of circling back, talking about being more intelligent, circling back to what we were talking about with the generational perspectives when it comes to passing down traditions. So I want to say another key distinction I would say is that lack of knowledge between in the younger generations, because what I've noticed is that as information has become more widely available, there seems to be less of a priority on actually gaining and retaining that knowledge.
I'd say retaining especially.
Yeah, retaining especially. Well, I saw a post recently. It was a meme that, with the quote that said, you remember whenever we thought that people were stupid because of a lack of access to information? Yeah, that wasn't it.
That's very true. Yeah. Very true. But we are kind of getting dumber because we are losing knowledge of the past. Mm-hmm. So when something has been tried and failed over and over and over again, it kind of makes sense not to keep doing that.
Yeah. Well,
why reinvent the wheel? It's kind of like what I tell my kids. Hey, you know what? I see that you are heading towards this cliff. I have personally been over this cliff. This is what happens when you go over this cliff. Yeah. So where's your choice?
Yeah.
And sometimes they're stupid and they go over the cliff and go, oh my gosh, Mom was right. But I'm like, you know what? Make your own mistakes.
Well, that's the thing.
Don't make the same ones I did.
Absolutely. Make your own mistakes and I think giving that choice is important though too.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Once you get to the point where like the person knows right from wrong or the kid knows right from wrong, okay, this is what happened when I did it. To me, it wasn't great, but it's your choice. This is your life.
It's your choice. It's your life. Hope you're going to pay for it.
Yeah. Well, and I think it's important to make that distinction too. Every time something in the past has failed and is retried, the consequences of that failure seem to worsen. Tragedies continue to become darker and darker as things continually fail.
Well, that's true. Stories fade, and the stories of those stories have faded, and the stories of those that fought against the human tragedies fade as the new tragedies arise.
Oh, absolutely.
And I think nowadays especially that there are so many people that create tragedies hoping that they'll have somebody rise up and save them, and yeah, it's just not working out.
Well, no, the thing is
it's causing division is what it's
that's
causing.
What it is. Well, and that's that cycle of history, is what it is. And that cycle of history is consistent from my perspective with human nature. It seems to be true that human nature is constantly seeking answers to the same basic questions. And principal to these questions is, where were we in the timeline of irons?
Well, I don't know, somewhere around the 19th century.
I would think we were a little before that.
Oh, okay. Well, I was hopping.
Okay. Well, somewhere along the line, after the mangle boards and the rollers, someone in the West figured out that if heat was applied to wrinkles, they tended to smooth, and it was a lot easier. So blacksmiths in the late Middle Ages took this concept and ran straight to the forge.
Yep, and that's right next to the bank.
Yeah. Well, they began by making these simple flat irons, or that we talked about last week, or even sometimes simply heating up some of the stone linen smoothers.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, in this phase of iron history, they did use stone, but from the Middle East to France and the Netherlands, they also used earthenware and terracotta. Yeah, these basic flat irons.
That's my place.
I know. These basic flat irons began then to resemble the irons that we see today, but they were all one metal piece, handle and all. So in order to iron a shirt at the time, the process was a little bit longer than today, and that's an understatement.
Oh, you know what? There we go. Aaron loves me.
I do. Well, first, a fire had to be made for the stove, and the stove had to be heated up to grip the iron. And to grip the iron, people would have to use pads if they could afford that, but generally they used really large rags.
Yep. Well, ironing was a huge chore. Mm-hmm. And if you were able to afford 2 irons, if you were not able to afford 2 irons, it really was just about pointless.
Yeah, because you had to have one to iron and one to heat up.
Yep, all the time.
Mm-hmm.
But aside from that, maintaining those irons was a chore all in itself.
Oh, yeah.
So, because the irons, they first had to be kept immaculately clean, because you don't want to wash all your clothes, dry all your clothes, and then have a black iron on them. You know, big old black smudge from whatever on that. But they had to be clean from any dust, any debris, because it was going to burn into the fabric. On top of that, each iron needed a consistent sanding and sanding and ironing to prevent that metal from wearing or becoming too rough. They also needed to be greased, just like you guys would do a iron skillet. Mm-hmm. You got to cook in it, and then you never ever put a skillet in the washer, in the dishwasher. You don't wash it like that. But after you get it cleaned out, you've got to oil it.
Yeah, you can't put them. You can wash them, but you can't wash them in the dishwasher because the dishwasher is more of a sanitizer, anyways. People don't realize that, but a lot of times when you put dirty dishes in there and you don't at least rinse off all of the food and stuff on there, it'll sit there and it'll dry and heat to whatever utensil you're putting in there.
Don't put any cast iron anything in your dishwasher.
No.
But you do have to, I guess, wash it out, but you never submerge it in water. But you clean it out. But you do have to, just like the iron, you got to get some oil and put on there to prevent the rusting.
Yep.
And if you guys are not using iron skillets, I understand they're heavy. I got it. They are the original nonstick.
Oh, they're fantastic.
If you take care of it. Now, if you don't take care of it, that's a whole other thing. But take care of it.
Yeah.
Great.
Well, and that kind of ties us back into speaking on that lost knowledge, of taking care of stuff. And, and the skill that it took to iron at that time was arduously acquired. They didn't have thermometers or timers, so learning to judge when the iron was the perfect temperature was definitely not easy. A few techniques for judging temperature were well known. They had one called the spit test. Basically, you would spit on the bottom of the iron and see how quickly it evaporated, but okay,
now if you're using a cast iron skillet again, number 1, don't spit on it.
No.
Now get a little cup of water, dip your little clean fingers in it, and do a little couple drops. And if they sizzle, you're hot. Mm-hmm. Don't spit.
Yeah, you don't need to. Well, and even the people back then, that was a generally accepted method, but it wasn't commonplace necessarily. Everyone seemed to have their own method. A lot of times
what they do is they lick their finger and touch it.
Yeah. Well, I guess maybe
is the same as spitting, but it just better.
Yeah, it kind of is. But I also read one that a gentleman had observed a woman who was ironing. She said, she put it very, very close to her face to determine what the temperature was. I don't think I'd go with that route.
No.
But all that being said, none of this was an exact science by any means.
No. But I think it's just like anything. Once you do it a million times, you just know.
Yeah.
So, it's just kind of like when cooking or doing something like that. Like my grandma Scott. I wanted her recipe for dinner rolls. She couldn't give me a recipe for dinner rolls.
No.
So we just kind of walked through what she did, and I kind of gleaned off of that how to make these dinner rolls, because she'd made them for 50, 60 years.
Yeah.
So she had no idea how to make the dinner rolls. She just made the dinner rolls.
Yeah. Well, she didn't know
the same.
The measurements or this and that. She knew how to make them, but not how to
but not how to write them down. But
she didn't know the formula, how to write down the formula.
At one point, which I think I still have in when I originally wrote it down, and she said, "You add just enough flour to it feels right."
Yeah. Perfect.
Okay. It's like that will not work for this generation.
No.
Feels right. What are you talking about?
Yeah. Well, I've found that a lot of people, a lot of my friends and stuff that cook or don't cook, you can definitely tell who is who's the person that cooks the most meals in their house by like, oh yeah, we have this and this. I'll just throw it together. Like if you can put together ingredients that you have out of necessity and make it taste pretty good, you're a good cook by book. Yeah. But,
that's true.
But back to this not being exact science, the difficulty of these tools inspired a quick succession of innovation following and continuing all the way into the 19th century. After the original flat irons came charcoal irons like this one right here.
Yeah, I have a smaller one upstairs. I should have told you to get it.
Yeah, but
it's like half the size of that one. It's really cute.
Yeah, but this one's great, and it's got the cock on it.
Well, that one does too.
Yeah. Oh, does it? Oh, yeah. I've seen it.
Yeah, but it's like this big.
Yeah, and the one we showed last week, this is the same one. Although we should have got the small one to show the difference.
Yeah, we should have done that. And I actually found, which it's up in my laundry room because I do decorate my laundry room a little bit. Mm-hmm. But it's it's not one of the whole sat irons, but it's the plate for the sat iron.
Yeah.
Because you would heat up that plate and then click it onto your sat iron and use while the other plate was heating up. So you kind of like switch plates out.
Well, yeah. So that came from the different.
That's upstairs in the laundry room. If you want to go, you can go right there.
Now I got to run up and get
2 flights of stairs and do that.
No, but that's what. So different countries, they had the different versions of this type of iron. So some of them had the one that you're talking about, and there were others called like the chimney iron or slug irons. Chimney irons had little smoke chimneys pointing up, out, and away from the user's hand and face. Like, so right here they'd have like a little basically smokestack coming out of it so that the smoke from the charcoal wouldn't get into the clothing that was left by by this type of iron. And the slug irons were an adaptation of the old flat irons because they would look a lot like the charcoal irons, but their base was a lot smaller, and they would just heat up little smaller pieces of metal and throw those in there. So they'd have maybe 10 different pieces of small metal, and they'd throw that in there. And when that one eventually ran out of heat, they'd have 9 other replacements real quick to put them in there. So a lot of these innovations led to the 19th centuries.
Yeah.
Yeah. So,
but as the 19th century came to a close, there were a whole lot more innovations, and they became increasingly complex.
Yes.
Mostly in an effort to retain the heat.
Right.
Retain heat in the best way that you can.
Yeah, because the hardest part about ironing back then was constantly having to reheat the iron or reheat the elements that you put in the iron to make it hot.
Well, they had, the reversible bases.
Right.
Gas jets. And then another one was a steam iron. So, and it basically kind of worked like a locomotive.
Yeah.
I mean, you would have pressure, kind of had a hose going to it and pressure building up so it would keep that iron hot and keep it going. Of course, now we have electricity. We don't have to use steam. But it's actually it was kind of a neat, looking iron.
Oh, yeah.
Because it was kind of as deep as what this one was, about 3 or 4 inches.
Yeah.
And then had the little spout on it where the hose would go to push that steam and heat that iron up to go through.
Well, all of that and the discovery of electricity led to the development of the electric irons. And by 1900, they were present all the way in Europe and the U.S.
Yeah. Innovation, though, it's a funny thing. It is important. And it has made life easier, but is it always the right path?
Well, I've found that everything worth having is hard to get. And I think that truth gets convoluted. The easier things like the iron make the maintenance of our basic needs. And with that, we are out of time.
Are we?
We really are.
Okay. Mm-hmm. I don't know what we're going to talk about next week. We're not going to talk about iron, so.
No, definitely not. But we're going to figure it out. Or one of you guys could get on the ball and comment and tell us something that you are interested in.
Yep.
Yeah.
That's true.
And now you can comment on the YouTube video. You can comment on the Instagram or on the Facebook page still.
Yeah.
So yeah. Thank you guys so much for spending this time with us, and we're excited that you get to see us and all of the wonderful facial expressions and hand gestures of 1 star of the show over there.
Are you being mean to me?
I'm not being mean. And before I get in too much more trouble,
I am your mother.
Stay hip.
And humble.
Bye now.
Bye. You know, I do have a spoon. I could get my wood spoon and bring down here. You're not that big.